So first of all, thank you everyone for being here. L2 is, I believe, the future of scaling a blockchain. Every blockchain has the same issue. And I think it's very important for us to discuss some of the benefits as well as some of the security issues, because these L2 systems are starting to have billions locked into them, and users should be aware of some of the issues they have as well as some of the benefits of L2s, right? So first of all, I'd like to welcome our panelists, Kris from L2 Beat. Thank you for your guys' work, by the way. Orest from Scroll. Torgin from Chain Security. Carlos from Polygon Hermes, or ZK EVM now, sorry. And then Christopher from Polygon, which... Yeah, they drank a lot last night. So first of all, the first question I'd like to ask are, how are L2s better than multi-chain systems? What are some of the additional benefits of L2s compared to something like Cosmos? And then what are some of the outstanding issues that we still need to solve this paradigm of cross-chain or multi-chain communications?
Okay, so I'm not an expert in Cosmos ecosystem, but generally it all comes to shared security of rollups. Like they rely on the security of the layer one of the settlement layer. So that's, I think, the biggest difference between other scaling solutions and other layer ones that scale in totally different ways. Yeah. Do we have any Cosmos experts?
No. I mean, I don't like Cosmos expert, but as you say, layer 2 inherits security from layer 1. But, for example, Cosmos doesn't, because it has its own consensus algorithm mechanism in order to assure all the protocol that it's been there. But in order to improve that, there is ongoing research on, for example, Succinct Labs, they are doing like Insight and Snark, they are building the consensus of Ethereum, so they can prove the consensus of Ethereum in another chain, so you can put the statement of Ethereum in another chain just by giving a Snark and proof of the consensus algorithm. It's just a proof of concept, but I think that's a very good way, in order to pass from...
A lot better than the current ones, which are shared.
From layer 1 to another, not layer 2, but another chain.
Yeah, so I think the fundamental trade-off of L1s when it comes to scalability is scalability versus decentralization, right? Like, for example, Solana has huge amounts of throughput, but the reason why they can achieve that is because the node hardware requirements are super high. Like, you basically need like a professional grade server to run a node. You definitely can't do it at home.
You don't have servers at home? Come on.
Yeah, it's like... Maybe good for heating your room, but like you can't expect people to actually run those kinds of nodes at home. And I think that's really the big unlock that rollups have, is that on the L2, you can actually have these nodes with huge hardware requirements, and that's okay because you don't need everyone to run one of those nodes to have security, because you inherit the security from the L1. And everyone can just run the Ethereum client, which then can verify that everything is correct, or you have fraud proofs, whatever. But you can use the small hardware to like kind of check the work of the big hardware, and then that makes it okay to have that be more centralized.
So what are you guys' like, L2s are fairly new, right? Fraud proofs, ZK proofs, especially ZK proofs, are really complex math, right? And with any new math, the way you prove it in production is time. Time test the systems, right? So with this sort of black box design, there's actually, I was at a speech where Jordi was speaking, right? And he was talking about his prover design, and someone asked him, well, who can audit your prover design? There's a handful of people in this world that know how to implement provers, some of the circuits, right? And one of the guys from Polygon Hermes was sitting next to me, and he whispered to me, Jordi audits his own systems, right? So how long until we can fully trust these systems? And what is the chance of us seeing a significant L2 hack in the next 5 years, you know?
I would say that what we need to do, I mean, as you said, there's a very brilliant new technology, new protocols, new architectures that nobody knows. There are a few people that can understand that. Okay, so let's grab these people and let's teach them what we are doing. So it's not just because right now, if you just write a smart contract, there are specialist audit firms that can audit your smart contract. I would say very good. But in our system, there is not this kind of audits. You cannot hire this kind of audit. So, okay, what we need to do is what it happens at the very beginning in Solidity. So you need to teach people, you need to perform workshop, you need to explain to them how to audit your system. And hopefully, I would say not in a week, but in half a year or more or less, there will be a lot of people able to audit, but not just ZKVM in general, I would say.
I believe also your guys' team, as well as a bunch of other teams, started auditing each other's prover systems. There's some sort of collaboration.
I mean, we are building the ZKVM, and everyone wants to be safe. I mean, we don't want to harm the users, of course. So we need to collaborate each other. We need to explain each other architecture, and we need to help each other, but not just auditing, just taking ideas, iterating over the protocol, and so on. And we are currently doing that. That's the way to go.
To this, I'd add that you probably are not that interested in how long a system has been around. For instance, the ZKPs, they have been around for decades. It's nothing new, theoretically. But you are interested in the integral of exposure or value lock to incentivization to hack, to break into the system, and the duration. And so that's a good piece of good news for ZKPs, because all of a sudden everyone is talking about ZKPs. And if you take a look at the agenda, like this L2 everywhere, right? Scaling everywhere. And so everyone is looking at what we, the rollup teams, we, the research teams, are thinking, designing, and trying to put on the road. And there's also another small piece of good news, and that is the other side of the medal of few people being able to audit circuits is also that few people are able to hack them because it's so early. And so in the long term, of course, we want as much exposure as possible, as open and educated a community as possible. But I wouldn't be surprised if the big hacks were to happen not in the circuits or provers, but rather in the bridge smart contracts. So that's, I think, where we need to pay a lot of attention to.
Yeah, so a couple of points here. Like, first of all, I think the currently rollup teams are doing a pretty good job just stopping the floodgates of retail money into the new ZK based systems, like Starknet. It's on mainnet, but there are like limits on the money that you can bridge there, right? Like Maker Bridge has its own limit, and probably every other bridge has something similar. So even though it's on mainnet, you cannot really enter the money, it's just preventing. It limits the exposure of retail for these systems. The same with ZK Sync team, right? Like I think they released something that they called Baby Alpha or whatever. Like these names are getting. Yeah, these days are getting more and more ridiculous, but it's only for their team to use right now. I think like no one can even interact with the system, but this means that these systems will slowly getting more value. And let's be honest, like TVL locked in these rollups, in these bridges, is just like a bug bounty. And this means that the more value they accrue, there will be more and more people looking at them. And the very same thing happened on layer 1 with DAO hack. Like the reentrancy wasn't like, no one thought about reentrancy attacks before the DAO gathered so much money that people actually started digging into EVM, bytecode, like virtual machine, multiple calls and so on and so on. And they realized, oh, we can do reentrancy attacks, right? I'm worried that there will be a very similar like a milestone. I mean, milestone is a probably bad word, but situation and event that's gonna happen in ZK world.
And that's like one of the nice things about the cryptography in this space is, in normal world, there's no incentives, very little incentives to actually study math and cryptography. Of course, people do it in universities, but here, if you have 1 billion on Arbitrum, that's a pretty good incentive to look into, right? But again, like as a percentage amount, what's the chance in the next 5 years, like Kris, because you guys look into this, of one of the major protocols getting fully drained the bridge contract?
I really
Exact
can't
percentage.
exact percent. So maybe I'm not gonna answer this question directly, but maybe it's important to realize what can we do to prevent such attacks, right? And this is something that Vitalik was mentioning on ZK Scroll actually conference rollup day before DEF CON. Like, instead of having only ZK rollups or optimistic rollups, we can have solutions which have multiple kind of validity or fraud proofs running at the same time, including even maybe governance or some security council. I think this is really the way that we should think about, like, how to prevent such such hacks on mainnet.
And we have a formalization proposed already, the 3 stages of training wheels for rollups that I think you guys are looking into as well. And I think that's a nice sliding scale of a trade-off between how risky it is to just continue doing what we are doing and how much of a slowdown we want to accept and stop the thing altogether and just keep doing audits. We want to have some sort of an equilibrium there.
Also, I think it depends on how confident are you in your ZKVM with what you are building. We are confident that we are building something that we are secure, but is everyone confident? No. Okay. So let's put these training wheels. Once everyone is confident, let's remove them so we are be sure.
And L2s they're essentially a bridge when you think about it, right? They're a substantially safer bridge than multi-chain. In fact, I'm working on the ZK IBC that you mentioned. I'm working on a speech called Next Gen Bridges and Why All Bridges Still Suck. The TLDR of this is L2 is a lot better, right? But the bridge still is the major point of attack for any L2 system. We saw this also with Nomad Nomad Bridge is a good example of this. They actually had a very nice system with their fraud proofs, and then they issued a contract upgrade. I forgot to check for null values on the Merkle leaf, and they got drained for 300 million, right? So how do we improve the current bridges? Most of them are, or the bridge designs for any L2, most of them are currently multi-sigs. What's the next steps? How do we move to phase 2, phase 3 when it comes to the bridge itself?
Well, I think first of all, the bridge is just a smart contract.
Yeah.
So I think everyone should audit that bridge, but at the same time, the bridge should have, if you want to upgrade the bridge, because from time to time there is some kind of improvements in the protocol that benefits the user for example, gas savings and so on. So you are optimizing the Solidity code or whatever. So you need to do some observability on the bridge in order to perform some updates. Okay. So the first thing is to add some time lock regarding the smart contract. So in order to do an observability, you need to wait. You propose the observability, and then you need to wait 1 month, 2 months, 2 weeks, whatever. But these observabilities needs to be audited as well. I think that's the missing point here. That's why when they upgrade, it was a malicious code, say unintentionally, was updated over there. So we need to be very careful about that.
Okay, so shameless plug. If you go to l2bit.com right now, we're not only tracking layer 2's rollups there, but also bridges. And what's actually very great about this subpage of L2bit is that you actually get to learn how these bridges really work. Like, if you go to, I don't know, layer 0 right now to their, website, all you're gonna learn is that it's trustless, it's amazing, it's the best, it's the cheapest. And then you go to L2Bit and you're gonna clearly see that it's like externally owned, externally validated, like a multi-sig basically bridge, or you have like 2 paragraphs on almost every single bridge explaining how it really works. So it's like, I think, the great resource for like, regular users to learn actually what they're interacting with. And I think this is something that we should begin with. Like people should be aware of different trade-offs that they do when they're interacting with different kind of bridges. But like
it's also a great resource to get depressed because everything has a red exclamation mark, and for a good reason. So
yeah, exactly.
You guys designed the thumbs up yet?
No, that is we're years ago, years ahead. But one thing regarding like how we can secure these solutions like bridges. I actually changed my stance on this because if you would ask me like 1 year ago, like should we limit the outflows from the bridge, I would like no, they have to be decentralized, right? Like, but actually like just limiting outflows, like having like you can't you can't have like more money leaving the system than X for a period of time is just actually probably a good way to secure the funds in terms of like critical bug. And of course it's not so simple to implement that, but I think it's possible to have like these safety checks that are very low level and prevent like critical hacks from like draining all the value in the bridge, just draining probably part of it. So I think like we should have more solutions like this, and something like this would save, for example, Nomad hack if they would have a simple limit on the outflows.
Yeah, and I think the cool thing about limits is also that you can actually have trusted actors that have very limited scope of what they can do, right? So you could imagine there's maybe some like council or whatever that only has the power to increase the limit, right? So if the limit ever gets filled, they go check if there's some weird activity or if it looks legit, and then they only have the power to increase this limit, but they have no other powers, right? And then, if they're malicious, like they still can't really do anything as long as there's not also a bug. So you can kind of have these layers of redundancy. And then the other thing, like the other type of bridge that's very popular, especially in the Cosmos ecosystem, is the like IBC light client bridges, where essentially you have each chain run a light client of the other chain, and then you can like basically just send the block headers to the other chain, which is kind of lightweight, and you can like verify that they're actually correct. And so in that way, you can remove the multi-sig aspect. But I think, it kind of sounds better than it is, because you end up with a lot of contagion risk, where you're only running light clients and not full clients. And what that means is that if one of the validator sets of the chains is compromised, then your bridge is compromised as well. So maybe if you're bridging to some small chain on Cosmos, let's say, where the market cap of their staking token isn't very large, it might actually be reasonable to like try to buy up the majority of those tokens, and then you can steal all the funds that are in the bridge. And often the bridge tokens are actually worth more than the market cap of the staking token.
Yeah, this happened with Luna, right? Like they needed to stop the bridge because of the token price crashing.
Yeah. You mentioned delays on bridges as well. So let's say there's a committee of individuals that are able to pause a bridge or do a bridge upgrade that take some time to implement so people have time to withdraw their funds before this happens. How do we? I saw Vitalik's proposal on this, right? So his idea is maybe a ZK system could run two of three multi-sig, where one of them is the normal ZK prover. Another one is a fraud proof running on Hermes, for example. And then a third, which is committee of individuals, and it'd be a two of three multi-sig. So how realistic is it to run a fraud proof on Hermes today? Like, how much does that take? Like, direct question. I want plans, I want dates.
Well, I would say, regarding the observability, as Vitalik said, at the very beginning of the training wheels, there will be like no gradability. No, you can upgrade the bridge when you want, I would say, no. But as long as the system performs better and you get more confident, then you add some delay over there. And as you mentioned, how to trigger that delay. I think Vitalik says 7 out of 14 in order to be a little bit more confident. But 75% of the 14 should be outside of the company. That would be an option. We could add fraud proofs. No, not say easily, but it could be done perfectly. Be perfectly done, but not just for ours, for everyone. But the thing is to give users enough time in order to withdraw. For example, Optimism has a withdrawal system of 7 days because of the fraud proof. So the delay of the bridge should be, of course, more than 7 plus 7, so 2 weeks, for example. You cannot put a low. You cannot decrease the time of the upgrade just because you can only put more time of the delay over there. There are some mechanisms in order to be sure that it's I will not say decentralized, because decentralized means that you cannot upgrade the bridge, but I would say mechanisms for the user to be safe.
And is there a way of like freezing it entirely, like just shutting down the ZK system to give time instead of having like an instant upgrade when 7 of 14 sign, to essentially just stop allowing state transitions on this chain until people have enough time to pull out, and then you upgrade the bridge?
At the end, if a bug happens in the zero knowledge circuit or whatever, the best thing to do is, okay, let's watch what about is the bug. And in order to do that, what do you need? You need time. So let's put on hold the system. So no one can withdraw, no one can perform state upgrades, no one can do anything. And then there is this Security Council that you mentioned. The Security Council basically decides what to do next. The Security Council can upgrade the state root to an old version, which it was safe while we are working on the bug that we found or whatever it needs. And this Security Council needs to be, people from the community, white hackers, very well-known reputation people. They should control the Security Council. At the end, it's multi-sig, but this guy, I will say, well-reputed people from the ecosystem, not just from Ethereum, all the crypto space, I would say.
I think that on the technical level, this question is quite interesting, because like if you have a zero knowledge rollup, they usually don't post like whole transaction trace, like transaction data, just state updates. And then it's kind of hard, I think, to build like optimistic solution, like a fraud-proof solution next to it. So I think that would require some changes to the architecture of the ZK rollup to support something like this, like two systems of proofs running at the same time. But I think for optimistic rollups to go ZK style, it might be sometimes a little bit, I'm not gonna call it easier, but at least there's a way on the horizon, an easy, a reasonable, more or less, way to accomplish that, which is, for example, like, you have these projects like Risk Zero that try to create a ZK virtual machine for risk architecture. And then you have, I don't know, Optimus running actually MIPS. So it's like risk, almost architecture for their fraud proofs. So what you could imagine in the future, once risk zero is done with their risk VM, you could potentially, run the trace of the Optimus Optimus system and use that as a second proof in their system. Like security cancer is easy, right? But like having this two proof system at the same time, it's quite difficult.
So one of the sort of L2 can't really be just forked away, right? We can't have social consensus that just says, screw it, we're not following this chain. We're going with this one, right? So a very important security property of old L2s is a forced exit mechanism, right? So if you don't like what they're doing, if they've been taken over, you can push a transaction on L1 and withdraw your funds forcefully, right? And we've sort of achieved consensus on it, so it's not something that we need to talk about today other than to mention it. The question that I do have on it is, this might work for someone that has 1,000, 2,000, a million. They would be incentivized to make a state transition and withdraw their own funds. But how does this work, especially in the future when Ethereum L1 fees go up and up and up and only rollups are submitting onto ETH L1? How does a regular person, how can they afford to withdraw their funds? Is there like a mass exit system? Probably not, because you'd need to pay all the gas, right? Like, how does that work in the future when L1 fees go to something unreasonable,
Well, you could have a mass exit system. So the way this could work, the way that for instance, we are thinking about it, is that even during the training wheel phase, you could still have some sort of emergency mode where a centralized sequencer, for instance, starts censoring people's transactions. And so the smart contract for the bridge on the L1 would stop accepting blocks from the sequencer if there's other blocks that haven't been included for some period. And so in such an emergency mode, what we could do is we could have the smart contract for the bridge allow anyone to submit proofs, validity proofs alongside the data. And why it's not a problem that someone has $50 and can't withdraw? Well, it's not a problem because it pays off for anyone who would then participate in creating proofs and sequencing in such a recovery or emergency mode to include as many.
Pay them off, kind of a thing.
So they would be
Or pay them back.
incentivized to include as many transactions as possible into the proof, into the aggregate proof that they'd be putting on the L1. So that kind of is a preliminary state to the final holy grail of no training wheels phase 2, according to Vitalik.
Then the person, each individual would still need to submit a transaction to the bridge to claim their own funds back, though, right?
Well, it
Unless you
depends.
do it too.
So you wouldn't necessarily even need to have people force exit or exit. Like the rollup could continue working as it used to be, and then anyone can just continue to use the regular user journey on the L2 to do what they like. For instance, liquidate the positions and withdraw funds.
Yeah, I think it all comes to the problem of proof generation. Like if you can do it, on a hardware which is not a supercomputer, and this of course depends on the ZK circuits, proof system type, and so on and so on. Then I think you have like much more wiggle room for solutions. Yeah, but I think like mass migration solution for rollups is also like a must probably in the future, because either mass migration or you have to have a way to decentralize sequencer, right? So then anyone can sequence it.
Which we do.
Yeah,
We know it's possible.
Yeah, we
And
need
about
some
those
time
hardware
for it, but-
requirements, maybe just to add on the hardware requirements. So it sounds like a lot, for instance, at Scroll, The pre-optimized, pre-alpha version of the roller requires like 300 gigs of RAM and a few GPUs. It sounds like a lot.
Yeah, but
It costs $5 per hour in EC2. I mean, it still is a significant barrier to entry, but it's not like you need to buy your thing for your basement. And you generate the proof in a couple of minutes and you disable the EC2 instance.
I would say I agree because at the very end, technology is evolving and we are optimizing the system, so the requirements are less for regular people. So if everything stops, you need to be approved in order. I mean, you force an exit and then you become a sequencer and then you become the prover. But what is the cost of doing that? Maybe just programming some script and then running a server. But nowadays, running a server is not that much. I mean, $5, $10. Maybe if you want to withdraw 1,000, it's okay. Maybe you want to withdraw 100, it's 10%, which is still a lot, but still your funds are not locked over there. So that's good. I also imagine, for example, we have the force exit mechanism in the smart contract, and that's it. Just put the data over there that you want to be running the ZKVM, and then it's run it. So it bypasses the sequencer. So I imagine like a top level smart contract on top of it in order for people to collaborate each other, in order to aggregate a lot of force exits, for example, and to put economic incentives over there. This kind of stuff. But they could build, users could build whatever they want on top of it. That's a good thing also.
is there a way to? Sorry, this is getting a bit advanced, but I am actually. We should have prepended it. This is intermediary level to advanced. It's not the basic L2 security. Is there a way to have sort of like a proxy contract in the proving system itself, like on the contract of the bridge on the L1, where you could achieve some sort of social consensus to what set of ZK proofs, for example, are accepted as state transition? So you could sort of fork through the bridge contract to another ZK system if people wanted to not follow it, and majority voted for this, so it would switch over to a new system. Sorry, this is getting more advanced, but I'm curious about that.
Why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't it be possible? Of course. I mean, it adds another layer of complexity and so on. So it's a matter of deliberation. At which point does it pay off and so on? Definitely something to consider. At some point, we won't want it, probably, though.
So quantum computers, they're kind of a meme, right? And a lot of the concerns that people have for quantum computers for certain types of technology are very largely overblown, right? But for the crowd, there's essentially two commonly used primitives that we use, which is ZK snarks, ZK starks, right? And we kind of generally know that starks are quantum resistant. But only Starkware uses them, right? Most protocols use snarks because they're a lot cheaper to submit and verify on ETH-L1, right? So snarks, we're not sure. They're easier to hack with a quantum computer. It's going to take a long time, right? And many qubits. But how easy is it to switch over existing system like Scroll or Hermes to using something else like Starks when it's already in production and the circuits have been pre-programmed?
I think that if we have this observability system, we could iterate over the protocol and upgrade it. And I think that right now the snarks are quite cheaper in order to do the verify functionality on layer 1. But hopefully Ethereum will adapt to the rollups, and it will with the proto-bank sharding, these new IPs and Ethereum 2.0 and so on. So at the very end, the difference between Starks and Snarks, hopefully it will not be that much in terms of gas cost. So we could adapt our system proofs in order to verify the Starks instead of Snarks. So we can be then quantum resistant.
Come on, is this a risk? Do you believe quantum resistance is going to be relevant for a ZKP system? I mean, everything's going to break. Like the government, your bank, your car, none of this will work. So we will have enough time.
Well,
hey, it's Y3K, come on.
I hope not.
Yeah.
You can build quantum resistant systems, but for Ethereum, for example, Ethereum could upgrade their protocol in order to be quantum resistant as well. So, I mean, you need to build, we need to start thinking of it. I mean, I think it's we have margin. I think we have
a lot of margin there.
But my guess is that we will go to that direction. I don't know what happened. What will happen.
We'll manage, don't worry.
I like this reference of Y2K of this was actually a real bug. This was a real problem. Then we upgraded computers. Y2K was fine. So actually for proto-dank sharding, right? We can do like for example in a ZK fractal system, so L3, L4, L5, it's fairly safe to actually it's very safe to essentially bridge funds within that one prover system. But then when we do something like L2 to L2 to a different L2, right? We can always use people who front the money, like LPs, that do this sort of allow you to bridge with a small fee. But how would proto-dank sharding help with being able to bridge funds between, does it help between being able to bridge funds between different layers that aren't the same system?
I think, I'm not an expert, but proto-dank sharding what gives to the system, it's like the data availability that the rollup needs to put on chain will become much cheaper. I mean, there is, I don't know exactly the time, 1 month, 2 months, that the nodes must help.
Oh, 1 month for data storage. Yeah, long-term data storage, yeah.
So you have the data over there, but it will be running over the time. So, I mean, users have enough time in order to have this data over there. This is not perfect scenario, I would say, because data availability should be always there. And I think that Ethereum is moving over there in the Ethereum 2.0, the sharding and so on. But I think the proto-dank sharding is an intermediate step, I would say.
I think we don't want the old data on the chain that everyone needs to process that we need to pay for. But independently of this,
the data disappears. And
well,
nobody holds
some people will hold it.
So I need to rely on that people.
No, because you can check the validity of what you care about in a certain period, and you have guarantees about that, probabilistic guarantees. And then if you care about the data, you can always hold on to it yourself. But independently of this, I think proto-dank sharding doesn't affect bridges.
We're going off on a tangent on it.
Everything's gonna get cheaper. That's it.
I mean,
So I think
Yeah, but
the answer is no.
I mean, it's different topic, I would say.
Yeah, but I think first of all we should talk about what kind of layer and scaling solution make any sense, right? Because actually, like you cannot just put like a roll up on top of roll up and expect that it's gonna get cheaper. Because if that would work, we would have like fraction of cents transactions already on mainnet just by putting optimism and optimism.
I'm gonna quote a theme, but it's infinite scale,
Infinite scaling. Yeah, so it doesn't work like this because of actually like data availability problem, right? Like data doesn't scale like this. You cannot stack data inside of data. It won't be compressed or whatever. The same as you compressed it once, right? So with this layer fractal scaling, actually it makes sense to put data somewhere else off chain. And I think for this reason, it's like totally separate from proto-dank sharding. Like usually you wouldn't put data on chain anyway. You would put it onto DAX or
For the L3 plus.
Yeah, L3 plus. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you wouldn't just keep the data on chain because it doesn't give you scalability benefits, but execution gets cheaper, right? On other layer 2, on layer 3 plus. Yeah, I guess you could do something with cheaper computation, right?
I think one thing that is important about layer 3s is that it lowers the force exit cost, right? Like if you want to force exit from your layer 3 because your sequencer went down, you only have to pay the layer 2 gas cost, which is supposedly a lot cheaper than the L1 gas cost. So to me, that's actually the main thing, is that on layer 3s, you can care even less about the decentralization of your sequencer or whatever, because if it goes down, your exit costs is actually relatively low. Yeah.
And you probably won't need anything above L4 anyway.
You would say, I want L14, come on. It does, ZK is, this is a little bit harder for optimism, but it is a sort of interesting property of, with Validiums, which is putting your data into a different chain of, because you're in this sort of fractal system, you can do, if you're bridging from L3 down to L2 to another L3, you don't actually have to do this whole path. You can do like a mint and burn mechanic to just the token appears on the other side, right? It just needs to submit its data down to the same data availability layer. That's a big assumption if they use the same ones. I think that's what they mean by it, but yeah, it's maybe not infinitely scalable. So for this is less about security, but it is kind of inherent to the functionality of these protocols and whether we should trust them of decentralizing sequencers and provers, right? How do we go about this? How do we make sure that like some of the proposals, I'm not going to name different proposals for how we decentralize them is essentially either a bidding war or sort of, to quote a Leo, proof of sufficient work or succinct work, whatever. The fastest computer always wins, right? The most efficient prover always wins. How do we stop that from being captured by people that have the most money or that people that have the most powerful computers? Like, what's the sort of balance that we can find in there to make sure that anyone can run a prover or sequencer? Again, it's not about the security because you can always leave the system, but
I mean, the ZK proof is the security. So, I mean, even if you are the most powerful or whatever, you cannot cheat the from go to state A to state B. So that's okay. Right now, what we have in our smart contract is just a public function. So anyone can call it and submit a proof, and that's it. So who will win, no, the race? So the one with more money probably, and that is able to buy more hardware. But I imagine in the future that there is a lot of people, a lot of entities that they have a lot of money and they are running a lot, no, in order to be the first one. So they are entering in a competition, which is not good for them. So they will reach a consensus between them in order to share the profits. I expect that to happen. Not in the short term, of course, but just in the long term.
So I think proof of efficiency is not good. I think we need something more clever. And I think I really like the PBS, proposer builder separation set of ideas. And I think we can get inspired by that for both sequencer and prover decentralization. And for instance, for the prover, we can deem that as kind of the builder part of the PBS. We can set up some sort of constraints that can be dynamic. For instance, there could be like a diminishing probability that the more you stake, for instance, the more likely, but not linearly, you are to get selected to submit a proof within a given period, which is not a very short period that only the fastest people can submit the proof in, but it's quite liberal. An alternative could be that people place bids to be considered for getting a probabilistic chance to get selected for generating a proof for a given slot, etc. So there's, I think, many very interesting ideas that that kind of are related to PBS and similar to the sequencer. So I think the research is actually quite, well, there's a lot going on and we already have a lot of interesting ideas out there in the research community.
Yeah, I agree. I think the reason why we care about who is the sequencer is mostly for transaction ordering and MEV, right? Because we have the security
and censorship, yeah,
from the proofs. And if there's no one, right, there just needs to be an option for anyone to become a sequencer. But in the most cases, we don't care about that. But as long as that's an option, we have liveness solved as well. So then we need to care about censorship and MEV. And yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot of lessons to be learned from the layer 1 MEV. I think what's also super important, that something that we're kind of starting to talk about more now, is the multi-block MEV, where if you can control multiple blocks in a row, you can do like way more stuff, way more extractive stuff. That's probably
Damage.
bad. Yeah. So I think one of the old proposals for Optimism, for example, was they wanted to auction off the sequencing rights like 1 day at a time, right? And that's totally crazy, because if you have a guarantee that for the entire day you're going to be producing all blocks, you can do like so much weird stuff that you don't want, right? So I think it's super important to keep these auction batches small so that you don't have too much multi-block MEV that's possible. I mean, ideally, you would want to have it so that you can't even know who the next block proposer is going to be, right? I don't know, like, if that's technically feasible, but that should be the goal, in my opinion.
We're running low on time, so I'd like to ask the last question. And I kind of want maybe a short quiz to give time for Q&A. What are the next steps that we should make in L2 security? What are the very next stride that we should really focus on the most?
Educate people. That is both transparency, what L2 Beta is doing, and that is also opening up the source code and asking people to review GitHub and get engaged into a discussion.
And also, just credit to Layer 2 Bit, because they are showing in an easy way, because for that time it's very difficult from regular users to go to the repository and check the smart contract and check the circuit, and there is tons of code over there, and they summarize all the main features just by super easy for the user. And
yeah, no, it's really good.
It's very good, yeah.
Thanks for the shout out, but we want to be even better at doing that. So for us, it's like what Vitalik suggested recently, like having like a clear categorization of different stages of, or maybe even tiers of rollups, like, you know, what's, and that would be actually, I think, a great summary for users. Like, you know, this is a stage 0 rollup, which means it's not that secure. It's in development really. But then there's something else, which is like, you know, stage 2, which is like fully secured by Ethereum, and users can easier comprehend that than, you know, the whole like different categorization and so on. I'm sure that it's great for all of us here, but like retail has some, you know, troubles in the you know, learning and understanding all these terms. So we want to make it a little bit more open and easy to understand.
So we talked a lot about the CK rollups today.
We did.
Of course,
the teams.
There's also optimistic rollups, and I think like it's kind of crazy that the major optimistic rollups right now, they don't have fraud proofs in it, right? And the whole point of an optimistic rollup is that you have permissionless fraud proofs. And you know, I know that it's very high on their priority lists. And yeah, basically, I'm looking forward to when those are implemented, and then we can move those from category 0 to maybe 1. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that.
So that's it. Thanks for coming. We have 4 minutes, 3.5 minutes for QA right now.
Hi all. I'm checking Vitalik's proposal for rollup-centric Ethereum roadmap, and I see a pretty vague definitions like short-term, long-term. Can you specify and stress a bit what does it mean in years or months? How you see your internal maybe roadmaps within transitioning from state of centralization to total decentralization, related with security, of course, which means applicability, TVL, and hacks, then solutions for hacks, new versions of the products, etc., etc. Like, it will be in 50 years, this end game for rollups or not? Yeah, thanks.
Sooner.
DM.
No, I would say short term. I think the meaning is maybe 6 months, 1 year, in order to have rollups in stage 2 regarding the training wheels, more or less. But still, there will be some vulnerability of there. Why? Because we are using the ZK VM. If the EVM evolves And Vitalik says that EVM now is fully, it's evolving very fast, but at the very end, the EVM will be frozen. So ZKVM will be frozen as well. But until this happens, we need to perform some observability. So I expect short term to have observability, mid-term observability, and stage 2 regarding the training wheels. Mid-term, maybe 2 years observability, but maybe 2 or 3 months. And at the very end, it will be no observability, smart contracts frozen, everything frozen, even the EVM.
So when it comes to this post, please don't read it. It's older than 2 weeks. It's complete, history. It's out of date. But when it comes to Scroll, I can share like the priority list for us. And the priority list is releasing to Gurley next, releasing to mainnet next, decentralizing the approved generation in the meantime. And after the mainnet, adding in the decentralized sequence step by step up until the holy grail of a fully decentralized one.
Years.
Soon.
TM.
All right. Do we have some other questions? Over there.
I'm not sure how familiar everyone might be with Ribbon's Avo rollup, but it seems like it's going to be a fork of Optimism where they reduce the fraud proofs to 3 hours. Yeah, I see some faces there. Essentially, do you guys have any thoughts on that in general, or are there any ways to really reduce or streamline the fraud-proof submission process that makes that more reasonable?
They might be front run by Optimism on that. I was talking to
Really?
Ben from Optimism actually about this. Yeah, you can reduce it down to 3 hours, 3 days. The sort of reason why we have 7 days is to organize time for people to fix the protocol, to
Social consensus.
right. So yes, you could have an optimistic roll-up with less days. It's hard to do 3 hours. It's maybe too little.
Actually, also like you had solutions like Nomad, right? Like Nomad, it was just implementation that got hacked, not the architecture, but they actually used like 6 hours for their fraud-proof system, so it was fast. But it was because the frauds, the proofs were so much easier, simpler, right? Like they are like
EVM.
EVM.
And I think it's good. I think it's good for diversity. There will be applications where you don't care that much about security. So you want to have those trade-offs and those less secure, faster finality options.
Yeah, and actually, I think Boba Network, they use this trick. They have no delay on their bridge. This trick.
Do they have fraud proofs yet?
No, I think Optimus fork, but
Alrighty, guys. We're out of time now. Thanks.
Actually, we still have some more time. The timer doesn't work. We have until 3:30. So if there are more questions, we're happy to take them.
Okay, 5 more minutes.
Oh no, now the audience not prepared anymore.
So one more question over there.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, like, in theory, it's good to have different systems that have different levels of security. But when you get into like a crazy bull run,
Yeah.
like people just don't understand the trade-offs well enough. So I think it's super dangerous, right? Like we have some systems already now that are like less secure and they're only supposed to be used for like games and stuff like that that don't have a lot of value. And then a couple months later, you see like $1 billion TVL because people are just bridging their funds in and not understanding the risk that they're taking. So I think it's always easy for us that understand the trade-offs to say like it's cool to have different ranges in the trade-off, but you still have to understand that your end users are not going to be as sophisticated and are probably just going to use the thing that like seems the simplest or cheapest or whatever. And it's kind of the system designers that have to make sure that the things that people use are actually also secure because they kind of can't judge it for themselves.
And educators.
Your grandma can check which contract is upgradable on L2B to use L2B. I'm not getting paid for this.
How
one.
much time? How much time?
Oh, one question here. It's pretty simple. since we're talking about innovation, it will bring in new challenges for the staff who will maintain the solutions and will audit the code and stuff like that. How do you think, what kind of new roles will emerge within the rollups market, CKP market, in terms of like maybe cryptographer stuff? I know that now lots of projects are going into unis, taking out the cryptographers and try to teach them blockchain, which is a painful process. Like, or companies like maybe like Hacken or Certic would go and try to find someone who would understand ZKP within their white hacking processes. So what kind of interesting role would emerge, and where you would recommend people who want to jump into the market, like look at the specific opportunities within the roles?
Well, ZKPs and the cryptography and polynomial commitments have been around for a long time, and I mean decades. And we, at least my perspective is, we are seeing a lot of engineering challenges that are becoming bottlenecks, and fewer of research-related or theory-level challenges. At least that's my perception of the ZK rollup space. So I think engineering and engineers who have some understanding of the cryptography, but also understand what it means to be rolling out a system for this amount of users and this amount of WebSocket connections per second, are gonna be very valuable.
Yeah, so I think we're still missing a good educational resources, how to go from, being engineering, crypto engineering, to be like ZK engineer. You don't need like a whole lot of math to do that. You don't need to be, a professor in math to do that, but you need to have some, context and so on. And I think we're still seeing just, some materials about it, and actually like, some companies are doing some education around that, but we need much more. And I hope like L2Bit is gonna like produce this like knowledge base how to do exactly that, because I'm learning that and like going through this process and documenting all my learnings. But yeah, it's not easy.
And a good angle, if anyone's interested, is just try and apply and work at a company, because you will get to work with the people who understand this stuff. And I think this is the fastest way to get up to speed. And it's actually possible because there's only so few people who understand right now.
It's always going to be a challenge for the short-term feature, though, because like joining the company, if you know circuit design, if you know, like ZKPs have been around for a while, right? But lots of theoretical math was around for a very long time before it was ever used for anything. And now we're at the point that it's actually being used, and there's billions behind this. So getting new security auditors is going to be hard, because if you know this stuff, you're probably going to build your own protocol, or join one of the existing ones. It's just one of those things that, as we start seeing ZKPs more in also outside of crypto, people will start learning, and the user base will get bigger and bigger of people that actually understand it, and eventually we will find them. For the meanwhile, like, I like the idea of protocols taking time, maybe a month or two, a year, of auditing each other's protocols, because it's not good for anyone if they get hacked. Like, we don't need more failures in this space right now.
And audits can mean like Binance on FTX.
We don't talk about FTX here.
So that's it. I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks for coming back.